A genocide on trial. Two senior leaders of the Khmer Rouge regime, which terrorized Cambodia for years, have denied any guilt. But will justice be served for the killing fields of Cambodia? And will the trial deter other rulers and regimes from violating human rights? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mike Hanna. They are the most senior surviving members of the Khmer Rouge regime in Cambodia. Accused of crimes against humanity, Nyon Che and Khieu Samphan face life imprisonment if found guilty. They will be sentenced next year. Both presented their final defense on Thursday as a two-year trial comes to an end, and both distance themselves from the deaths of as many as 2 million people during their rule in the 1970s. Florence Loy has the latest from Phnom Penh.
The line started forming in the morning, not just survivors of the Khmer Rouge regime, but the younger generation for whom that period of Cambodia's past is a few chapters in a history book, but all eager to hear what former regime leaders had to say to defend themselves. Nyon Che, also known as Brother Number 2, was the first to speak. He denied the charges and asked the court to acquit him.
There is no evidence to prove that I did it. I didn't have any effective power or position to have a direct control over the forces or local authorities.
His statement provoked scorn and anger from those who lived under the regime's rule.
He's a liar. He was a Khmer Rouge leader. How could he not have known what was happening?
If survivors were hoping for an expression of contrition from the other accused, Khieu Samphan, the former Khmer Rouge head of state, they didn't get it. He said everything he did was for the good of the country. This was the era of the killing fields of the 1970s, when the Khmer Rouge leaders killed around 2 million people and expelled millions from the capital Phnom Penh in 1975. The trial has been divided into several smaller cases to make it more manageable. This hearing focuses on the alleged execution of government soldiers and the forced evacuations. Prosecution lawyers have described the event as the beginning of the dehumanization of the Cambodian people. But the tribunal has faced criticism. The current government, which consists of former Khmer Rouge members, including the Prime Minister Hun Sen, has said other less senior regime leaders should not be tried. Some human rights activists accuse the government of political interference, charges the Prime Minister's son and politician sidestepped.
Regardless of the allegation and the discussion through the media that I have seen, I think until now I still firmly believe that the ECCC has been a success.
Prosecutors meanwhile say they're eager to proceed with the hearing for genocide charges against the defendants. But both men are already in their 80s, and lawyers say the window of opportunity is closing fast. Out of the initial 4 defendants, 1 has already died, and another has been declared unfit for trial because of ill health. A verdict is not expected until sometime in the middle of next year. Survivors of the Khmer Rouge regime hope this won't be their last chance for justice. Florence Loy, Al Jazeera, Phnom Penh.
The Khmer Rouge started out as a communist-inspired guerrilla movement in the 1960s. Led by Pol Pot, the rebels moved out of Cambodia's northeastern jungles and eventually took power. When they seized the capital Phnom Penh in 1975, the Khmer Rouge marched more than 2 million people to labor camps in the countryside, one of the largest forced migrations in modern history. Businessmen, intellectuals, Buddhists and foreigners were all purged under the communist regime. In total, some 2 million people, up to a quarter of the population, were killed through a combination of executions, starvation and overwork. Well, let's bring in our guest in the Cambodian capital, Phnom Penh, Nicholas Kumjan. He's a prosecutor for the ECCC, that's the Extraordinary Chambers in the Courts of Cambodia, which receives assistance from the United Nations. In Leeds, Chiang Phanarith, Senior Fellow at the Cambodian Institute for Cooperation and Peace. And joining us on Skype from The Hague is David Tolbert. He's the president of the International Centre for Transitional Justice. Welcome to you all. Let's begin with Nicholas Kumjan. A verdict next year only. Why the delay in what has already been a lengthy process?
Well, the trial itself has taken 2 years. The case file consists of hundreds of thousands of pages. It's a complicated case involving events that took place over several years, over the almost 4 years of the regime. Although this trial is concentrating on certain specific facts, the forced transfers from the cities and later between zones, between rural areas, and one particular execution of government soldiers and officials, the policies of the regime that these formed part of, the policies of persecution, of forced marriage, the policies of targeting suspected enemies of the regime are all at issue and are all necessary to prove in order to, because they form part of what we call a joint criminal enterprise by the Khmer Rouge leaders in this case.
Well, Chiang Fanarith, how important do you think it is for justice to be seen to be done after all these years?
Well, it took almost 3 decades to bring the senior leaders of the Khmer Rouge regime to trial, to justice. From the Cambodian perspective, it is significant to find justice and truth and reconciliation for the Cambodian society. They need to face the past in order to heal the present. So the Khmer Rouge Tribunal is part of the justice for the Cambodian society.
Well, David Tolbert, that phrase we heard there, to face up to the past in order to deal with the present, is that an important part of the process, do you believe?
I think it is a very relevant and important part of the process. Ultimately, if we are going to have a society that respects human rights, we have to deal with the past, we have to address the past. The past has to be reckoned with. The social contract between government and people and society needs to be reestablished. And I think we've seen in we have many experiences in many countries where when the past is reckoned with, there is the possibility to move to a society that respects human rights. So I think reckoning with the past is an essential element in restoring the social contract. We have a lot of experiences around the world that show that. This will be a long intergenerational process. I think we have to emphasize that. It's not done overnight or in a short period of time, but reckoning with the past is really very important. And I think we've seen some progress in Cambodia despite a lot of difficulties around the tribunal and with the government and so on. There is a recognition in civil society, and we're seeing the Khmer Rouge period talked about in the schools and the society in a way that it wasn't just a short time ago.
Well, we heard the reference to the problems that have been faced in some way by the tribunal. Nicholas Kumjan, has there been any attempt by the current government to influence or attempt to impact on the proceedings?
In the case in which we just finished the proceedings, case 02, there recently was a statement by one of the former defense attorneys who was representing Ieng Sary, the accused who died a few months ago, where he said he did not feel there was any interference in that case, case 02. I arrived this month and had the privilege to sit through the oral arguments, which took place over 10 days. The defendants and their counsel had the floor to address the judges for 5 complete days. And they were given complete freedom, which they used to express their defense of the Khmer Rouge ideology and policies, and also to complain about what they viewed as unfairness in the trial, what they viewed as faults in the process, and complained that in their view the whole proceedings were a propaganda exercise. Nobody interfered with that, not the judges, not any external actor. They were given free rein, and this was in front of hundreds of people in the gallery every day, Cambodians and international journalists, and broadcasts over the internet. So what I can say in my experience in the month that I've been here is I haven't seen interference. I've seen a hard-fought trial between two sides.
Well, Chiang Vanarith, that whole issue of the government and its discontent to a degree with these proceedings, and yet it has allowed them to go ahead, and there we hear allow them to go ahead unaffected in any way?
Well, the Cambodian government have shown some reluctance in bringing the Khmer Rouge leader to justice. That's why it took so much long time. But the scope of the charges, I think the court probably could not move beyond the case 002. And the government, especially the Prime Minister remarks, have been clear that the court probably must be stopped when it finishes the case 002.
Well, David Talbot, that brings us to the fact there we've got other cases supposedly lined up, cases 03, cases 04, no indication of who will actually be charged in those particular cases. But it has given rise to criticism that this does amount to show proceedings. It is symbolic more than attempting to find out exactly what happened. What's your view of that position?
Yes, and I should say at the outset that I did serve for a time as the Secretary General's special expert on the Khmer Rouge trials, so I have some familiarity with what's going on there, although it's been several years ago when my engagement took place. I do think it's important to note that the way that the tribunal has been set up in this hybrid fashion, but with a supermajority required, is an experiment that I don't think anyone in this field would want to see repeated. There have been a lot of blockages. As my colleague just noted, it appears that we are not going to go beyond case 2, at least in terms of trials. And I think there are very serious questions that arise with respect to this issue. I do think it is important that these senior leaders were brought to justice, but it is clearly an incomplete process, and a good bit more needs to be done on the criminal prosecution front, and I don't think any of us are optimistic that that's going to happen, but other things need to happen as well. There are memorials that are there. Those of you who have been to Cambodia have seen S21. But getting the truth out is still a very difficult task, and it's clear that there are members of the government, parts of the government that don't want to see the complete truth out. So I think the tribunal has done some good, but much of the potential has not been realized and unfortunately does not look to be realized.
Well, Nicholas Kumjan, your response to that this is an incomplete process. Do you agree?
Absolutely. It's clear that there's much work left to be done. Even this case, this phase of the case that we just finished, is just covering a portion, a relatively small portion of the total outstanding charges in case 02. So I do think that the court needs to produce further results. I think we're producing results now. It's taken a long time to come up to speed, but much more needs to be done. I don't think the court in any way is causing instability, just the opposite in Cambodia. The Khmer Rouge are a completely discredited force that no longer has relevance politically or militarily, but historically it's extremely relevant to understand what happened during this period of time, both for Cambodia and for the rest of the world.
Well, Chiang Vanarith, that whole issue of the public response, is there the possibility that having proceeded so far within this process, that there will be public pressure for more details to be released, for more people to be accused, and for more of this history to be revealed? Is that likely to come from the Cambodian public?
Generally, the Cambodian public wish to see more truth, to see more realities. what happened during the Khmer Rouge regime and wish to see more responsible senior leaders to be brought to justice. However, the reality is not the case. The lack of funding and the political interference to certain extent have prevented the court to bring this complete justice to the Cambodian society. But at least you can see the increasing interest and participation from the Cambodian people, especially those victims of the regime, in this process through education, through healing process, and others being the receiving the victim support program of the court.
Well, let's just pause here and widen the context. In recent years, the International Criminal Court has pursued a number of leaders accused of using violence against their own people. Slobodan Milosevic was indicted for crimes against humanity in 1999, but died in 2006 before his trial came to an end. Last year, former Liberian President Charles Taylor was found guilty of aiding and abetting war crimes and crimes against humanity. He was sentenced to 50 years in prison. Others to be indicted but never convicted include former Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi, who died in the 2011 revolution, and Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir, who's facing several counts of crimes against humanity, genocide and war crimes. But to what extent, David Tolbert, are these proceedings symbolic? All of these individual proceedings that are mentioned there, more perhaps about demonstrating accountability than the exercise of justice. Your view?
Well, I think we have to frame this in the right context. We have in these conflict societies or in societies that have massive human rights abuses, you have thousands and thousands of perpetrators. For example, Nick Kumjan and I both worked extensively in the former Yugoslavia. There were 10,000 perpetrators alone in Bosnia. The Yugoslavia Tribunal has brought everyone to justice or accounted for every case that indicted. It indicted 161 individuals. It will end up trying about 121. So in one sense, yes, there has to be a prioritization of these trials. It's not possible to bring every perpetrator to justice. But there are other ways to address these issues of truth and justice. Obviously, criminal accountability is essential and important. But where you have these kind of numbers of perpetrators in mass crimes, transitional justice mechanisms such as truth-telling, truth and reconciliation commissions, vetting processes where human rights abusers are vetted out of the police and other security services and the judiciary are really essential. And then also reparations programs where the suffering and the injuries of the individuals that have, the victims are recognized. So this has to be a much broader process to bring justice to that society. And so that ultimately what we want to see is the relationship change between citizens and states. And that's what we're looking for. And this accountability is very important. But I think we have to realize that not everyone who's been a perpetrator will be brought to the bar of justice like some of the senior officials. But this is a massive shift. Before the establishment of the International Criminal Court, before the ad hoc tribunals, the chances of anyone facing the bar of justice were practically zero. That is no longer the case. Well, Charles Taylor can attest to that.
Well, Chiang van der Ruth, I'd like to pick up on something that David Tolbert said there, the changing the relationship between the people and governments. That's a very important part of the process. Has it happened within the proceedings in Cambodia, do you believe?
Yeah, we can see the complementary factor of the court, the Khmer Rouge Tribunal or the ECCC, in contributing to building the public institution in Cambodia, especially the judicial institutions. So in that regard, the relationship between state institution and the people, the citizen, have been improved. In addition, you can see the engagement of the court with the ordinary and grassroots people, so they become more aware of the justice system and judicial process and what is justice means to them.
Well, Nicholas Kumjian, that is a long shopping list in terms of what is happening, what this proceeding does, venturing far beyond, in a way, the confines of the courtroom, does it not?
Absolutely. In my view, and I've been working in this field for 13 years of international war crimes, it's absolutely essential. As David Tolbert said, I believe the world is a different place now than it was when we started these tribunals in 1993. It's very important to victims. Does it mean that no more crimes will be committed? No. If we prosecute murders in every country and still murders are committed. But what if we didn't prosecute any of them? First of all, more murders would occur, and second, for every victim out there who sees justice has no chance of being addressed, will not believe that they live in a just society. Crimes as great as what happened in democratic Kampuchea, what happened under the Khmer Rouge, have to be addressed. We as a society, as a world society, have to address these kinds of crimes, or the world is simply less of a just place. It gives some hope to people throughout the world, and it acts as some deterrent in the future. It raises the bar for leaders. This is minimum standards they have to meet.
Well, Chiang Vanarith, your view about that, putting accountability on leaders not only who face prosecution, but those who are still to come?
That's right. That is the signal to the Cambodian leaders and the world leaders that they cannot escape if they commit mass crimes against humanity, genocide and war crimes. So that is, at the end of the day, they have to face justice.
David Tolbert, I want to pick up on something that you mentioned there, truth and reconciliation. You mentioned as one of the processes. Are we looking at here, one of the most important things, a sense of closure, not just a sense of vengeance, but also a sense of closure about what happened to families, what happened to people, what happened to individuals?
I think in the Cambodian context, you're seeing the beginning of that. One would want to see more processes. One would ideally want to see some domestic prosecutions. I think it's very unlikely in the case of Cambodia. A Truth and Reconciliation Commission, reparations programs. Now, the Khmer Rouge Tribunal did have provisions for reparations. The judges have made that very clear that that is symbolic, but things like memorials are really important to try to bring closure. I think the thing that I find so encouraging, despite all the problems with the tribunal, and we cannot shy away from that. As I said earlier, this is not a model for the future, and there are a lot of issues that are on the table. But if you look at the situation in the society today, whereas you wouldn't have to go back too far when the young people of the country did not know much, if anything, about the Khmer Rouge period. And the tribunal, the extraordinary chambers, has had an impact along with some very courageous civil society actors. And I think we really must recognize them. Yu Chang and his DC CAM coalition and a number of others are very courageously brought these issues to the fore. And so you see this change that we've been talking about. You see the Khmer Rouge period reflected in the textbooks, into the curriculum. And societies that make these kind of changes, whether it's Argentina or post-Nazi Germany, ultimately the historical narrative needs to change. And one hopes that we're seeing some of the green shoots of this now in Cambodia, and perhaps as time goes on and governments change and society becomes more democratic, we can see more of the harvest of this. So I think these steps are useful, even if the processes themselves have been less than ideal and flawed in some ways.
Well, the hopes that these green shoots will grow. Thanks to my guests, Nicholas Kumjian, Chiang Vanarith, and David Tolbert. And thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. If you want to send us your feedback, just email your thoughts to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. I'm Mike Hanna. Thanks for watching. and goodbye for now.